The comedian Jim Bowen, who became massively popular hosting a slightly shambolic TV quiz show.
Jim Bowen was a household name back when Bullseye was the go-to show for families. Everyone recognized him from the iconic opening jingle that first introduced him to his unique voice as the show's host. During the 14 years that the program was on broadcast, Jim rose to the status of billionaire host, and his fame soared in tandem with the show's popularity. Upon his death, he stunned everyone with the sum he left behind in his will. Why did Jim's loved ones find out about his death so suddenly? The fate of Jim's £1 million is important, so let's get to the bottom of it. Jim Bowen was born to a single mother in Heswall, Cheshire. What happened to her after that is anyone's guess, but Jim ended up in a Wirral orphanage. The working-class Whitakers of Clayton Le Moors, Lancashire, Joe and Annie, took him in as their own. After participating in World War I, Joe worked as a bricklayer at Accrington's Norrie brick business, while Annie was a weaver at Atlas Street Mill. Joseph, whose given name is James Whitaker, resided in the hamlet of Clayton Le Moors to the west of Accrington, and was a student at Accrington Grammar School in the years after his adoption. With the exception of one O-level, he was able to get employment in Burnley as a dustman. Jim served in the Royal Army Ordnance Corps in 1955 as part of his national service. Up until 1957, he was an ammunition inspector while serving as a corporal. He made a critical mistake during the Suez Crisis when he sent the wrong cargo of armaments to Barry Docks. Because of this, he was instructed to attend a physical training course in Aldershot so that he may eventually become a teacher. After realizing the military wasn't the right fit for him, Jim likely decided to change careers and teach gymnastics at a nearby school. He went to Chester Diocesan Training College to be ready for his role as deputy headmaster of Caton Primary School in Lancaster. During his time as a teacher, Jim was involved with the local theatrical club, which piqued his interest in the entertainment business. He started doing stand-up comedy in northern clubs in the 1960s, all the while maintaining a full-time teaching position. But he was unhappy in the classroom and decided he'd had enough of teaching after a while. On the contrary, Ken Dodd was inspired to devote himself entirely to stand-up comedy after a successful performance in front of 3,500 spectators in Blackpool. Bowen was his stage name. It was a blend of Owen, his wife's maiden name, and Brown, the first part of his mother's surname. The launch of Jim's comic career was rocky. He had to be funny enough to win over fans while still making it through the industry's cutthroat competition. He was eventually able to launch his career in 1971 with the smash hit Granada TV program The Comedians, Thank God. When this opportunity earned him national television notoriety, it ultimately convinced him to pursue a career in entertainment full-time. Bullseye was the best possible thing that could have happened to Jim's career. In 1981, Jim hosted a new game program called Bullseye on ITV. Popular with fans and a staple of ITV's Sunday night programming, the show cleverly combined darts with general knowledge quizzes. Its 15 to 20 million weekly viewers often outpaced those of the most popular evening soap operas, a testament to how popular it was. As soon as the show went live, Jim became an overnight sensation, opening doors to prestigious opportunities like speaking at the Oxford Union. He became well known when several of the phrases he used on the show became catchphrases. The adjectives super, smashed, and great were ones he said he never used, although he did popularize a few others. If you gamble and lose, all you'll receive is your BFH, bus fare home, he would often caution players, emphasizing the risks of the game. He was noted for telling players, "Keep out of the black and in the red. Nothing in this game for two in a bed," referring to the dartboard rules that said a player would forfeit the payout if they hit the same target twice. Nobody will ever forget the moment Jim showed those who lost the bet what you could have won. Bullseye became a cult favorite, particularly among college students, because to Jim's massive fan following. Consequently, he was a regular in the unions held at Oxford and Cambridge. He was well known in the UK and had a diverse history in theatre and cinema, which gave him an edge in business. Before moving on, it might be wise to revisit the beginning of the program. Bullseye was conceptualized by Andrew Wood and comedian Norman Vaughn after researching the factors that contribute to the popularity of game shows. Roger Edwards and Mickey Brennan were other guests on the show. From the very beginning, the producers knew that darts would play a central role in the show's concept. A trivia specialist and an amateur darts player each made up one of the 3 teams that the producers ultimately decided to use for each episode. Then these teams would compete for a variety of prizes, including anything from brand new cars, recreational vehicles, and all-expensive holidays, to more practical and comforting things like dart sets, tankards and goblets for men and women, and bendy bully rubber toys based on the show's mascot. This brilliant idea could finally set sail after we found the perfect host to coordinate everything. They knew they needed a hilarious and fantastic host, so Jim was a natural fit. His charismatic hosting and the show's groundbreaking mix of knowledge and darts helped cement its place in British television history. Jim openly acknowledged that his flaws, which he humorously referred to as being an absolute prat, contributed significantly to his immense popularity on Bullseye. However, achieving success was no picnic for him. He recalled fantasizing about hosting a game show due to his passable stand-up comedy skills. It seemed like a certain way to get famous from where I was standing. I didn't realize how brilliant Bob Monkhouse was until I began going, and I was terrible at first. One of the things that makes Jim so appealing to his audience is his deeply modest, unassuming, and vulnerable human being personality, as the legendary game show host Bob once put into words. Despite the early struggles, Jim eventually became one of the most famous game show hosts of all time. According to him, the head of Light Entertainment instructed the crew to scrap the first 2 episodes the next day after filming them in a single night. One lucky person had won a car valued at £64,000. On top of that, he said that his agent was the one who saw the shows first and immediately severed connections with him. Yet, he would be eternally thankful to director Peter Harris for never informing him he was awful. Instead, he decided to treat him to Chinese cuisine and offer him some performance-enhancing advice. They recorded 2 more shows the next day, and each of them were only marginally better. Jim was supported by his wife Phyllis during the whole process of filming 13 episodes, with the best one appearing first on a Monday at 7 o'clock in September 1981. He wanted to hear what Phyllis thought about it, as he remembered viewing it with her at home while on holiday. "I should probably brew a cup of tea." Jim started to think that his career was over after losing 7.5 million viewers in the first week. Nobody said anything until she eventually spoke out. The figures, however, started to go up with the 9th episode. Jim recounted the incident with a grin and speculated that viewers tuned in astonishment at how awful it was. He lamented it had to get better, since he was sure that on Sunday evenings they discussed Jim Bowen's idiocy on television at the bar. Sadly, this was not the case. A lot of people said, "Wow, it's really going to new extremes," after the 10th week. Word of mouth propelled it to cult status, and much to everyone's surprise, more episodes were ordered. We were contagious among the general public. Though he had a rough time of it at first, Jim eventually won out and cemented his place in television history with his unique style of humor and relentless persistence. At its peak, Bullseye received an astounding 12,000 applications annually and a waiting list of 5 years for audience membership. Jim became famous for a number of catchphrases that he recalled from memory. However, most of them were not written down. To the next person who says, "Look what you could have won," keep in mind that Jim came up with the excellent concept. Even though he couldn't believe they had speedboats as rewards, he did say that the only applicants to ever win them lived in flats on the top floor of Coventry. In order to save you the trauma of remembering your youth, Jim further clarified that he had nothing to do with initiating the whole smashing incident. Jim did in fact say that 30 times in one presentation, but he didn't admit it until Terry Wogan's radio show. Jim had almost perfected his hosting skills by the 4th season, but he sometimes made a fool of himself. On the other hand, he did admit that there were some humorous mistakes. He recalled an embarrassing error he made during the miners' strike and said that there were always his outtakes on "It'll Be All Right on the Night." In answer to his question about the contestant's profession, the man said, "I'm a miner, Jim. I've been out of work for 9 months." Jim, taken aback by the statement, used the term smashing. How simple they were to respond also contributed to the question's comedic value. Questions like who came second in the previous war were seen too basic and received criticism for that. Not everyone who took part had a genius level of intelligence. In fact, several of them had IQs below room temperature. On one occasion, I read aloud the question and answer by accident. The contestant persisted in referring to Chicago even after being questioned, "Where was President Kennedy assassinated?" "In Dallas." Conflict arose as individuals tried to divide up the rewards. Jim recalled, in hindsight, that they often engaged in contentious debates on the distribution of awards. Having two people living in the same house doesn't mean you can simply divide and conquer the kitchen. Notwithstanding all the negatives, Jim had nothing but praise for his stay. As he reminisced about the show, his audience burst out laughing. Monday night programming on ATV began airing Bullseye in September 1981. By 1982, the show had moved to Sunday afternoons and joined up with Tony Green, a professional darts commentator and referee, to maintain score. This change attracted almost 17 million viewers. Viewers of Bullseye, which ran from 1993 to 1995 on Saturday afternoons, were never happy. Oddly enough, in 1996, the groundwork was laid for a 15th season. But in the end, Andrew Wood decided that the proposed changes and enhancements from Carlton and the ITV network would hurt the show's appeal, so they were put on hold. Even after its first 14-year run ended, Bullseye still managed to attract up to 10 million viewers. Nevertheless, viewers were overjoyed when the show returned for a fresh season on the Digital Channel Challenge after an 11-year absence. This new series, which Granada produced at the Leeds studios of Yorkshire Television, returns Dave Spikey and Tony Green as presenters and co-hosts respectively. Jim had a successful live morning magazine program on BBC Radio Lancashire from 1999 to 2003, when his stint on Bullseye ended. Challenge TV airs repeats of Bullseye 4 times daily, which contributes to the show's increased viewership. After becoming famous, Jim appeared as a guest on several shows, such as Weakest Link, BBC Two, Des and Mel, Richard and Judy, and The Morning Show with Phil and Fern, among numerous others. He made 3 appearances and won twice. Last but not least, Jim was a huge hit at the Edinburgh Festival in 2005, 2007, and 2008. During his hour-long performances, he would share experiences from his career in stand-up comedy with a focus on stories pertaining to Bullseye. The shows concluded with an interactive question-and-answer segment. Jim has now brought this format to smaller venues, where he still amazes audiences with his hilarious stories and chat for 2 hours. The enthusiastic reception Jim received in Edinburgh was a reflection of how much he enjoyed his stay there. In his own words, Jim appreciated everyone's generosity and support and thanked them all individually. Aging, which Jim was going through along with everyone else, brought on a slew of health issues. The topic of Jim's wealth quickly came up after his death. His success was greatly enhanced by the 17 million people that watched Bullseye. During his 14 years of stand-up comedy and game show hosting in the 1980s, he achieved great success. Over £500,000 was his yearly salary. Jim had a lavish lifestyle, so let's talk about that before we get into the topic of his family's inheritance, which everyone was wondering about. That Jim was wealthy was well known to us. He had gotten to be a multi-millionaire from being a school teacher. His lifestyle was therefore anticipated to undergo a transformation as a result. He was able to live lavishly because of his handsome pay. Aside from his enormous country estate and personalized Rolls-Royce, he also had a BMW. He had a life of ease and plenty, thanks to the wealth he had amassed through his successful work. Additionally, he received a substantial amount in the late 1990s when the humor channel UK Gold purchased more than 300 episodes of Bullseye. In an interview he did in 2008, Jim went further into about his riches, revealing both his original gains and his earnings at the moment. In 1955, before he became a teacher, he had earned £3, 2 shillings and 6 pence a week, emptying garbage cans in Burnley. He remembered this when asked about the contents of his first pay packet. Jim considered the financial goldmine that was Bullseye and its enormous popularity as he reflected on his most lucrative assignment. During its peak in the 1980s, he earned a respectable sum. He recalls a particularly prosperous year when he earned £500,000. This was due to his involvement in the creation of 26 episodes and his nightly commitment to stand-up comedy. Jim said that he was able to maintain his desired lifestyle in retirement because he watched Bullseye on repeat. Revenue from reruns, which accounted for 17% of the original fee, started to fall once the show moved to Challenge TV. Still, Jim beamed and said that they did get occasional leftover checks, which they put into their drinking fund. When his accountant at Bullseye made sure he maximized his pension contributions, he bragged about his meticulous planning. Jim made a joking remark about how his family may not even have the time to spend all of these riches, while also boasting about their financial security. Among Jim's investments was a tiny semi he purchased in Accrington, Lancashire, for £1,685 in 1959. His wording for the crumbling walls of the house was that they let one dip bread in next door's bacon fat. Luckily, they improved their living quarters over the years until they settled into a decommissioned Victorian train station in Arkholme, Kirkby, which they purchased for 30,000 GBP in 1975, and then sold for 250,000 GBP in 1989. When we interviewed Jim and his family in 2008, they were living it up in the peaceful Lune Valley, which is on the border of Cumbria and Lancashire. Jim made a joke about how being married to Phyllis for more than 50 years was his best financial choice, in contrast to the riskier ventures of others who remarried often. He said Phyllis's dual role as his secretary and life partner was an unavoidable consequence of their extended intimacy. On the other hand, Jim was honest about his worst financial blunder, spending 90,000 GBP on a Bentley Arnage that broke down often and cost an additional 30,000 GBP in repairs and other expenses due to careless upkeep. He ended up getting a new car that fulfilled all his needs except it couldn't brew coffee instead of his reliable 75-pound S-Class Mercedes. Even though it was a more fuel-efficient model, he continued by saying that Phyllis enjoyed driving her 45,000-pound Mercedes. Jim chose to be forthright about his money management strategies by acknowledging that he used a single credit card for business expenses. Each month, after making all of their individual expenditures on Phyllis's credit card, they would pay it off in full. According to him, they preferred the convenience and security of using their cards to pay for their nightly visits to the bar, which often included taking out £30. Jim has a history of financial struggles and debt even before he became renowned. He also admitted that they were perpetually in debt from the time the interview took place around 10 years ago due to mortgage payments. He and Phyllis used to be financially unstable, but now they're set financially. During a conversation on being generous, Jim said that he often leaves high tips at restaurants. He used TV anchor Ted Rogers, who was known for leaving £20 for taxi drivers, as an example. A £5 gratuity was a common way for Jim to express his appreciation for outstanding service. Despite his high income and prudent financial planning, Jim's net estate in the UK was only worth £363,232, according to probate documents. Very remarkable, isn't it? All the money he made makes you wonder what happened to it. But nobody was shocked since Jim was famous for living large. In his testament, he bequeathed his entire wealth to his beloved wife of 58 years, Phyllis, as well as his two children, Susan and Peter. What was missing from the calculation, however, were any assets or accounts that he and his wife held jointly. Many believe Jim did not have any obligation to give his family a substantial fortune because he was the one who earned all of the money. As far as they are concerned, he spent whatever he wanted and yet left them enough to get by. Feel free to share your reflections on Jim's life and passing. Please inform us by leaving a comment. Thanks for stopping by. The more engaging the movies seem, the more likely you are to press play. Like subscribing and clicking the bell symbol will guarantee that you are notified anytime a new video is added.